Amsterdam user group. She was featured on Gillian's admin podcast, and you have to listen to that, by the way, if you haven't yet. And she was part of the Salesforce World Tour London keynote, as where she got her golden hoodie. And then the incredibly moving video that Salesforce made and is featured on the Salesforce Trailblazer page with Gemma's profile. So Gemma had a fantastic month as a Lady B architect, and she did us very proud. So thank you very much, Gemma, for all your hard work and all the dedication and time you put into this. And I'm very proud to see everything that you're achieving. So thank you.
Thank you. There's a lot of buzz about architects at the moment, and I think we've just about hit it at the right time. People want to hear more about what you can achieve as an architect. So obviously, because of it being World Tour, there's been lots of other events going on. So I've been trying to get out there and tell and get everybody encouraged and start to build people's confidence and self-belief around the architect program. But again, thank you for everybody's support.
Absolutely. And it's part of what makes the Ladies Be Architects so special, right? Is we are mothers, we are wives, we have full-time jobs, but we're still climbing this mountain. We're still getting out there. We're still helping each other. We've got Susannah running the study group. We've got, and I'm sure there's lots of our members that are going to be speakers at all these events coming up in the next couple of months. And this is all of us doing our bit to talk about the inclusion and the equality that is so needed in the architect world. So Gemma, you are a trailblazer, and thank you to you and to everybody else that is helping us on this journey. With that in mind, we've got a couple of things coming up in June, very US based. I think the US is kicking off their community event cycles. We have Salesforce Connections happening in Chicago, June the 12th, 12th, 13th, and 14th. So I'm going to be talking about the path to become a Salesforce architect. I've got a session there. So if you're in Chicago, please come and see me. Please come and listen, come and help me, and come support me. We also have 2 sessions at Texas Dreaming. Jordan is going to be with me, or I'm going to be joining Jordan actually, on June the 15th at 2:15 Central Time. We're going to be talking about 4 ladies with a big bag full of certifications and what our journey was like. And it's going to be a panel Q&A type of session. So come and speak to us, come listen, come ask questions. This is how we will help each other. That's going to be on June the 15th. And then June the 15th, very early that morning, please come out and listen to myself and one of my colleagues, Jason, where we're going to be not just talking about OAuth 2, but also showing you live how to build your OAuth 2 flows and what it will look like. We'll actually see the connections being made live, and we'll see the packages sent backwards and forwards. So please come out and support us if you can at Texas Dreamin'. And then on June the 6th at 4 p.m. Central, I think it's 2 p.m. Pacific time, we're going to be talking about how awesome app stacks are. And I'll be telling you guys all about my app stack, the apps I typically use as an architect on my projects, and apps that really help me be successful as an architect. So go to App Exchange. It's being publicized. There are links to join, so it'll be nice to see you guys. And then we have a little bit of a competition. So if you come and join us at one of these events and you come take a selfie with us and you come and say hello, we'll have some swag, but we also have some limited edition Ladies Be Architect t-shirts that we'll be handing out at these events. So please come and join us. Any other events that we don't know about? Anybody else presenting or anything we can include? We want to be supportive. We want to all do this together. So if there's anything, you can post it in the comments or let us know, and we'll add it to the calendar. We'll make sure we support you. We'll come shout in the stands and make sure you're successful.
Yeah, we got a few comments in the chat. So Jordan's done a shout out to sign up now to get a hotel in the Dreamforce block. Blanca says if you'll be in Chicago, you may want to attend Women Who Dev user group and the Chicago WIT user group. And Angela has called out that we have Forcelandia. Charlie's going to be speaking there as well about CTA. For Ladies Be Architects, but also one of the keynotes is Arena, who was the first female Salesforce CTA. So that's really exciting stuff to go to. So if you get the opportunity to go to Forcelandia, that'll be brilliant. And Melissa is presenting how Einstein became a philanthropist at Midwest Dreaming 18 and Texas Dreaming as well.
Wonderful. All right, we'll add this. We're going to set up an event section on the Arc Ladies website, so that we can track it all there. And then Angela and Melissa and everybody that's presenting at the other events, I'll make contact with you so we can make sure you get some stickers you can hand out at your events. And I'm definitely going to come and listen to your sessions. Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to hand it over to Susannah now. Thank you very much, guys, and thanks, Susannah.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Gemma. So let me go ahead and, yeah, I'll start presenting. Let's see. Okay. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Can anyone see my screen?
No.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So thanks again, Gemma. Thanks, Charlie, for inviting me to come speak about the Platform Developer 1 exam. Before we dive in for the sort of whirlwind, maybe 35, 40-minute version of Apex Basics, I'll just do a quick introduction of myself. My name's Susannah, and I have been working with the Salesforce platform for around 7 years now. Like many folks, I started out as an accidental admin. I was working at a nonprofit and just really fell in love with the platform. And over the last seven odd years, made my way from an admin to focusing more on development. And then in the last 2 or so years, I started working at a Fortune 500 medical device company here in the US called Boston Scientific. And I am an IT architect there on our team. We have an enterprise implementation of Salesforce. We have about maybe 7 different Scrum teams working at the same time on solutions for our global org. We do a one org, which has a lot of challenges just by their nature, but also we take advantage of the shared resources. It's pretty cool. And I am one of 3 developers, or excuse me, 3 architects on our team, and we have around maybe 20 plus developers working all at once on the same platform. So it's quite exciting. Back in November, I started up the architect pyramid, and back in, let's see, around March at Trailhead DX, I received my app architect certification, and I'm working now towards my system architect. So my next planned cert, and I have a deadline for myself for next month, is the integration exam. And then hopefully I'll tie up the loose ends with identity by the end of this year, with a goal of heading to the boards at the end of 2019. So trying to give myself 1 year to really focus in on the content after I've cleared the prereq exams. And let's see what else. I am really feel very fortunate to be able to say I'm a graduate of the Rad Women Code program. That's how I got inspired to really move from admin to the maybe a little more programmatically technical side role to begin with. And this past year, I was very lucky to return as a coach. It's a really great program. I have some more information about it in the resources at the end of this deck. And then I guess the last little bit of intro I'll say is that I am from the US. I live just outside of Boston, but I was actually born in Colombia in South America. So I'm a dual citizen there. Okay, so this is, again, a whirlwind tour of some Apex basics that will help you prepare for the Platform Developer 1 exam. Because the short nature of this of the presentation, we're going to start pretty high level, going over, what exactly is the PD1 exam, where does Apex fit in, and then we'll dive deeper on to how to actually read some of this code, how you might work with things that you're used to perhaps working with on the configuration side in a programmatic manner. Also, some tips on how you would actually get those records out of the database into your code, how to work with them, and then also how you would push the changes you made back into the database. So some basic features of Apex, and then we'll go back up high level and take a look at some best practices that even as a beginner, either developer or a beginner Apex code reader, you can really start to recognize patterns and bad patterns. So that's the agenda. And diving right in, so Platform Developer 1. When I first started getting my Salesforce certifications, there was a different bit of a layout of the admin versus developer exams. There was the admin cert, which still exists. And then it was a Force.com developer certification. And over time, people realized that there were actually a lot of folks who were taking that exam, and some of them focused more on configuration and building apps. And that side of that exam has now turned into the app builder. I'm focusing more on process builder and configuration, things that you can do with the platform. And then this new certification, Platform Developer 1, came about, and it really focuses on the programmatic side of the platform. And I actually think it's kind of gotten a little bit of not a bad rap, but I do think it's scared some people off. And I actually am a big advocate for folks to say that you actually can get the PD1 certification. You don't have to be a developer. You don't have to be writing code every day to do it. There are some, principles you need to know, but I really strongly believe that, anyone can earn the PD1 exam cred, whether you're an admin, a developer, or a project manager. And one of the first things when I talk about this exam I like to do to sort of maybe put people at ease or dispel some things around it is that as part of the exam, you're not actually writing any code at all. The exam does take the form of all the other Salesforce exams. It's a 60 question, with the 5 extra questions, 60 question exam. You have about an hour and a half to complete it. And frankly, the bulk of the exam is looking at different snippets of code and being able to see, A, will this break if I run it? B, what will happen if I run this? What result can I expect? And then also some of the, general Salesforce questions to make sure you know about limits and things like that. But if you're approaching PD1 as an admin, I would say that you have a great advantage, because another piece of the exam is that you need to know when to use code versus clicks, and the best way to identify that is to know the limitations of declarative features of the platform. So anyone coming to study for this exam that has a great knowledge of Salesforce, I feel has a little bit of an edge maybe of someone who is good at code but has never worked in a platform as an admin. So I might be biased, but it's definitely where I'm coming from. Okay, so diving in a little bit deeper, the platform exam, Platform Developer 1 study guide, I was looking at it in preparation for this presentation, and it has a whole lot of content on it. I actually think it's one of the longer specs for one of the exams. So what I wanted to do in order to put Apex and understanding Apex basics in context is, taking a look at where in this pie are the pieces of Apex basics, and knowing how to read and work a little bit with Apex going to help you. As you can see on the bottom, that big purple section, the logic and process automation, this section is both on sort of knowing, again, the limits of declarative. So you would need to know when can you use a roll-up summary and when can't you? And when might you need to use code in order to bridge that gap. So a lot of this exam, like 46, almost 50% of the exam is about working with Apex and understanding at its core Apex basics. And then another, 10% and 12% are very directly related to Apex as well. So Apex controllers, as we'll dive in a little bit on that, they are related to Visualforce and Lightning component pages. And then the Apex testing framework, of course, the whole reason we need testing is because we're deploying code to our maybe production org or another sandbox org. So that's, if I look at it, do the math, it's 68% of this exam, frankly enough to pass it. I think 65 is the passing score, is based on Apex, not on some of the other programmatic features like Lightning, some of those new features. It's really core Apex understanding. Okay, so with that in mind, we'll go very high level. At its highest level, Apex is a programming language that is unique to Salesforce. So if anyone asks you, you don't need to be a Java expert to learn Apex, but I know when I first started coding and I would talk to maybe some of my friends who had more experience or CS degrees, things like that, they would ask me, well, what's this Apex? What is it like? Is it like another language? So for those either that know Java or get asked that question, I always like to share that Apex is a lot like Java. It's also similar to C#. And we'll hit this a little harder in a following slide, but it's also a strongly typed programming language. And so just remember that word strongly typed. It'll start to make sense a little bit once we look at some code examples. Let's see. Whoops. Let me go back to there we go, presentation. So Apex runs, right, whenever an event occurs in your org. And Apex allows you to extend the features that Salesforce comes with out of the box. So if you run into a limit with, for instance, rolling up maybe aggregate information from a child object to a parent object that doesn't have a master detail relationship, you could use Apex to do that roll up for you. And you know, there are frankly three main places that you'll be using Apex, and these words get thrown around a lot, usually correctly. But for beginners, I think it is, you know, really helpful to understand there are like three flavors, three types of instances where Apex will really come in handy. And the first one is an Apex trigger. You've probably heard that word before. And essentially, a trigger is a piece of code that listens for an event. The event might be inserts of a record or updates to a particular record, but it's a piece of code that sits there and listens. And then what happens after that trigger hears what it's been programmed to listen for, it passes those records to another Apex spot called an Apex class. And inside that Apex class, there are even smaller bits of code. And these bits of code are what really does the heavy lifting, and they serve a specific purpose, like doing that roll-up or creating a new record. And then finally, Apex controllers, and we won't hit much on this today, but what you should take away from it is that an Apex controller, if you hear that word, is the Apex code that provides the data that is shown on a Visualforce page or a Lightning component. And essentially, controllers are just another flavor, another type of an Apex class. Very high-level overview. So we're going to dive one step higher before we dig in deeper. So on this slide, it's just showing at a very high level what we just talked through. So an Apex trigger is coded for a particular object. In Salesforce, you can code a trigger, but it has to be object specific. And when you code that trigger, the trigger is going to listen for different events. So if you look down at the snippet of code, again, if you aren't familiar with all the pieces of the code, that's fine. We're going to go over the general arc of these three steps. So the trigger that we code is on the account. So you can see in 3. And we've named this trigger, really clever, account trigger. And then we've told the database that this trigger is listening for specific events. And in the parentheses, you can see that the event that this trigger is listening for is before insert. So it's listening and it's going to do something before a record, in this case an account record, gets inserted into the database. There's a lot more information on different events, on those different words, and there's a resource here that I linked to. So if you want to learn more about Apex events, you can click in that hyperlink. So once your trigger, it's listening, it hears the event that it's been coded to listen for. Inside that trigger, then, we have another snippet of code. So starting on the right-hand side, row 7, depending on that event, the Apex trigger is simply going to route those records that, in this case, got inserted into the database. It's going to route those records to another chunk of code that's actually going to act on them, that's going to do stuff to them. So starting on line 7, again, it's okay if you understand the arc, but the code as it's written is saying that if the event that just happened is an insert and it's before that record is being inserted, then pass those new records into a sample account class. That's just the name of that chunk of code. And inside of that chunk of code, go to a specific spot. And that spot is going to be called sample before insert method. So it's just a sample little bit of code. So this is as high as we're going to go. This is the arc of how Apex can work in Salesforce. And as you can see, most of the action, most of the activity happens in that Apex class. So that's where we're going to spend the rest of the time really digging in deep. Now I'm going to go ahead. Okay. So working with S objects, and if anyone has any questions, feel free to chime in. I can't see the chat, but please interrupt me if you have burning questions, and we'll hopefully have some time at the end as well. Okay, so working with S objects. So this is where we get a little deeper on the code and looking at how we actually work with Salesforce records you might be familiar with from the front end in code. So this principle took me a little while to wrap my head around, and there's an excellent blog written by Kieran Jameson that I have a link to at the bottom of the slide that does a really good job of explaining it even deeper. But at a very high level, S objects are a data type. And I mentioned that Apex is a strongly typed language, and I said I was going to explain what that is. Essentially, a strongly typed programming language is a language where there's different data types that come baked into it. So similar to how Salesforce, when you create a new field, you're able to choose the field type, like a text field or a number field or a formula field. In Apex, you can do something similar when you're declaring or when you're writing out your code. So that's nice. That's a nice feature of Apex. And along with that, in a strongly typed programming language, you also have to write the type or mention the type of the thing you're working with every time you type that code. And so what I mean by that is if you look down at the sample code, you can see in line 2 that we're doing something with an account. And what this is actually saying from left to right on line 2 is saying that we're going to create a new S object, which is essentially a Salesforce record. It's confusing, right? Because we have Salesforce objects, Salesforce records, and now we're introducing Apex S objects. But essentially an S object is a template and a container for a Salesforce record. And you can define the S object to be a standard record or a custom record, and you can put a lot of information about that particular record into an S object. It's essentially an abstracted version of a Salesforce record. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but if you look at the illustration, this is from Kieran's blog, I think it does a nice job of sort of visualizing it out. It's saying that our S object or Salesforce record is kind of like a recipe card. It's a template for the Salesforce object that I can make. I can store that recipe somewhere. I can make the recipe and bake brownies, but the recipe card or that S object is just a card. It's not a brownie. This is something, again, that took me a long time to wrap my head around, but I think at a high level, if you can remember that an S object is like a Salesforce record, and it's the way you modify and edit Salesforce records inside Apex code, you're on the right track. So back to the code at the bottom of the screen. So on line 2 again, we've said we're creating an S object of data type account. That's what the first word is doing. And then on the second little bit where it's saying A, account A, in English, what that is saying is we're creating an S object of data type account, and we're naming that S object A. So you could have named it anything. The A doesn't mean, necessarily that it's doing anything special. It's just a name we gave that particular variable. And on the other side of the equal sign, we can see that we're creating a new account, an empty record, essentially. Like if you went to the UI and clicked new, And then starting in line 5, we're doing some of the things that actually make working with S-objects cool. We're giving this new account that we created a name. That name maps exactly to the name field in Salesforce, which you know is actually a text field, which is why we have that text, Sunnydale High, written in parentheses. Again, there's a lot of information on data types, which I think is linked right here in a hyperlink. How to work with, text fields versus integers and number fields, but at a very high level, using S-objects, we're able to create new records and add different attributes to those records in our code without ever touching the database and without changing the records inside it. Okay, so now we get into some more tangible stuff. So retrieving records from the database. In order to, another concept that took me a little while to understand, when you're working with records in Apex, when you're pulling information out of the database, first you need to query it using a different type of markup, so a different language. So it's like, why do we need Apex and a different language? It's actually an advantage because SOQL comes with a lot of pretty cool stuff baked in. So SOQL, as you can see on the second bullet, is the Salesforce Object Query language. And it's the way that you can retrieve saved records that exist in your org and then work with them in code and do different things, change them based on their values, create different records. It's essentially, one of the first steps if you want to edit something that's currently in your database. And SOQL follows a pretty readable, consistent format. So you can see in that first white section there that any SOQL statement that you read is going to follow this format. It starts with a select, and after the select, you say which fields you want from a particular object. So the fields in that section, they use the API name. So not the label of the field on the front end of Salesforce, but the API name. And then also we use the API name of the object. And those are the only two required statements when you write SOQL. But there are also a lot of cool optional statements that you can use, like where. And we'll look at an example about that down at the bottom of the slide. And there's some others as well, like you can limit how many records come back. You can sort them if you want. So again, similar to like how you might put some filters, write filters for a report on the front end, your SOQL query is putting filters on your data that you're retrieving from the database. Okay, and when you use SOQL in your code, you're writing a query and you're getting back one or likely more than one records, you need to do something with them so you can work with them later in the code and do something new. So you put your SOQL results, the results of that SOQL query, into another data type. So we talked about S-objects already as a data type in Apex. But there's another, well, actually, there's a lot. There's a lot of data types, but one we're going to hit on today and work within our examples is the concept of a list. And again, pretty similar to reports, if you think about how it works. In this particular bit of code on line 1, we're saying that we're creating a list of accounts. So a list of account S objects. And into that empty list that we have, we're writing a SOQL query and putting it there. So on the right-hand side of the equal sign, we're saying, okay, we're gonna query accounts, because I can see that from the from account. And then I'm saying from account, select the name field and the phone field. Sort of a, I guess, bonus tidbit, the ID field always comes along whenever you do any SOQL query. So if I wanted to use that ID, I'm going to be able to retrieve it anyway later. And then I'm saying get an account and get the name and the phone number, but only where the name of that account is equal to Sunnydale High. And from our previous example, where we started to insert Sunnydale High, we could probably figure that we're not going to get a lot of results back. But either way, we're putting those results into our accounts list. So this is at its core a really basic SOQL statement to retrieve records from the database. And once we retrieve records, we probably want to do something with them, right? So we've retrieved them. Now we want to do something with them. Like I said, typically when you're working with SOQL, you're going to get more than one record back. You might get a list of accounts, you might get a list of contacts, any object, but you need a way to work through each of those records that get returned in order to do something to them. So there are many different loops. So loops is a concept that we use to iterate through those through those records that get returned to us. But in the interest of this high-level overview, we're just going to talk about a specific type of loop called the for loop. And this is, I would say, by far the most common loop that you'll see if you're reading code. And the structure for a for loop goes like this. It's an abstract. So we'll do the abstract and then go to the example. The abstract is the for loop takes a particular list or set. So like in our previous example, it would take our list of accounts, and that's on the right side of the colon. And then we're going to create a new S-object variable, or variable to hold each of the singular accounts that we want to iterate through. And I'll show you what that looks like in a second. And then inside the brackets, we're going to do something to each of those records each time. So the for loop is essentially saying for each of these records, whatever it is, inside this list, do this every time until we're done with the list. And this is an example, so it's a little easier to read with real content in it. So if we walk through this example, we're using SOQL that we just took a look at before. There's a different statement. It's a little more meat in it. But we're saying, again, from the left to the right, we're creating a new list, which is a data type in Apex. We're creating this list, and we're going to put account S objects into the list. And then we're just naming the list something. So we're going to name it top 10 accounts. As a best practice, it's good to name your variables, name the things that you're using, something that makes sense. So in this case, on the right-hand side, that's where we're actually telling the list what we're going to do with it. So I can see that we're, again, using SOQL. We're selecting the name, and this time we're selecting the description field. From an account, we're ordering that returned list by annual revenue descending. So what that means is we're selecting from accounts, the name in the description field. Oh, and I actually it would be helpful if I retrieve the annual revenue. We're ordering it by largest to smallest, and then we're limiting the results to 10. So the result would be top 10 accounts. But I think an important point to note, which again, when I was just starting, I would get a little bit confused by, it doesn't matter what this is literally just like the name of a field or something. This doesn't necessarily do anything to filter out the records that are going to be returned. I could name it bottom 10 accounts, but it would get really confusing when I start to work with it in my code. So on line 5, now we're going to take this new concept of loop, and we're going to do something with those 10 accounts. And again, this is a really pretty basic example, but we're taking, okay, for account A. So again, anytime we work with anything in Apex, we have to remind the code what data type we're working with. So in this case, we're saying for S object type account, we have one account, and we're going to name it A. And we're going to iterate over each of those A accounts that exist in this list that we just created via SOQL. And using our loop, using this loop pattern, the stuff between the brackets is going to happen every time we go through one of those accounts. So we're going to update the description each time we loop through all 10 accounts. And at the end of the day, each account will have the description top 10 account. And we could do other things. We can update fields. We can, whatever is between those brackets is the code that's going to execute for each of those items in the list. Do a time check. Okay. So to sort of round it all out, so we've retrieved records from the database. We've done something with them. And now we want to put them back into the database. Because until we do that, again, an important principle to remember, we can, add descriptions all over the place, but the records that we're working with in Apex code are not the literal records inside the Salesforce system. So in order to push them back into the database, we need to use another tool that's called the data manipulation language, or DML. And luckily, DML is probably the easiest of the concepts to understand because it uses really literal words. And all you need to do is use your DML word. So in the example at the bottom of the screen, the word is insert. All we need to say is insert A from our initial example where we created a new account called A, gave it a name, added a feature or added an attribute for the number of employees field. And now if we want to insert that into the database, all we need to do is use DML and on line 27 say insert A. And then it's inserted. If we didn't do insert A, it would just hang out and not be inserted into the database. Okay, so we've gone pretty deep and looked at some really specific ways to work with Apex. So I think to finish off, I just want to go back up to the high level and talk about what you can do with these tools now that you understand how to retrieve objects to work with. Retrieve records to work with in Apex, work with them and manipulate them, and then also push them back into the database. With those three tools, you can really start to read code at a high level. And maybe some simple examples will be easiest at first, but you'll be surprised at how much of the code that you see follow some of the patterns that we just went through. So along with that, you're going to be able to start seeing things that shouldn't be done, or might run into some limits, some governor limits or things that Salesforce is going to prohibit. So to close this out, we're just going to look at 2 examples using the code that we've worked with already in this session of things you should do and things you shouldn't do. So the first one, don't put SOQL or DML into loops. So we've learned about loops. We've learned about DML, or data manipulation language, and we've learned about SOQL. So this is a good example of something to avoid. You'll see it looks similar to our previous code on line 2, 3, and 4. We're getting our top accounts out of the database. On line 7, we're starting to loop through our accounts. We're saying for each account in that list, go through it and add a description or update the description. And then on line 10, you can see that we added a little piece. So now we know about DML. We can add our update A and update each of those accounts. Seems pretty simple, but the issue here is that every time we run through that loop, we're going to update that record every single time. And if we're only working with these top 10 accounts, maybe we're not going to run into any issue. But as we'll see in our next look at the deadly sins of force.com programming, you always want to plan for, maybe not the worst case, but you always want to plan for more records than you think might ever run through your code. So if someone does a data load and maybe runs 200 records or 1,000 records, you're going to quickly run into one of the Salesforce governor limits, which is 150 DML statements per transaction. So this is a pretty easy way to run into some errors on line 10. So what you want to be on the lookout for instead, or what you want to do, is do your DML only once. So we'll walk through, it's more code, but I'll walk through the advantage of this. So line 2 through 4 is our same SOQL statement that we've used. Line 6, we're starting to do something different. So line 6, we're creating a new list of accounts. And you can see that we don't have any SOQL statement. We're not adding anything to it quite yet, but we're just going to put it there and hold on to it for later. Now, starting on line 9, we're looping again, same for loop structure. We're saying for each account in our top 10 account list, go through and add a description of top 10 account. And then the thing we're doing differently which is a best practice, is we are adding all of those updated accounts to our new list. And then we're updating or using our DML statement outside of the loop. And so what's happening here is we're only doing this DML or update operation once. No matter how many records, this loop could, run through 200 records, but we're still only inserting that list once. So this is absolutely one of those things to look out for. If you're doing the PD1 exam, if you're starting to read code, optimizing your DML and doing your DML statements outside of your for loop is a really great best practice. Okay, and then the last one. So you'll hear this concept of bulkifying your code a lot. And essentially all that means, you'll hear about bulkifying your triggers, bulkifying your classes. Really what it means is you're planning for high volume to run through your code. And because Salesforce, when it works with large volumes of data, it's smart and it batches it up into 200 record little chunks. Because of that, the best way to bulkify your code is to plan for at least 200 records to run through your trigger or to execute on your class. And if you can test that you can do that without it breaking, then generally your code is considered bulkified. So why this little snippet is not bulkified, our sock will trigger not bulk, is you can see again our for loop on line 2 is going through, and this is a little bit of a new concept, but for those that know, this trigger.new is a cool little built-in part of Apex triggers. Our trigger is aware of the new records that have fired it. So trigger.new is just saying, hey, run through every single record that just fired this trigger to run, the new version of it. There's a lot in trigger context variables in the slide deck, actually, if you're interested in that. But for this particular example, what we're really looking at is line 5, because this particular trigger is running through all of a particular set of accounts that was updated. It fired this update trigger. And we're saying, okay, for each of these accounts that just got updated, go and search for their related opportunities and get the ID and the name and the close date of them. So again, if it's one account that gets updated, no big deal. But if we're talking about 200 accounts getting updated and running through this SQL query every single time, we're going to start to hit our limits of, I think it's 100 of SQL queries in a particular Apex transaction. So if we tried to run 101, we'd start to get into an issue where we're seeing errors. And so the best practice or the way to avoid that would be to use a similar pattern of avoiding SQL in your for loop. So in this case, we're creating a list first, doing our SQL once, and then we're iterating over all of those accounts that just got updated. So again, a best practice to be on the look for, and definitely questions in the PD1 exam about this. What would you expect to happen if this particular code back in our previous example, what would you expect to happen? And the answer would be you'd expect for it to break if more than 100 records went through it. Okay, so that was a lot. There's a lot of content, but at a very high level, you need to be able to read Apex, but not necessarily write it to be successful on the PD1 exam. And Apex itself makes up more than, or exactly 68% of the exam. For better or worse, the exam is very server-side or Apex heavy. There's not a lot of content on Lightning components yet. I would expect maybe in the coming years there will be more Lightning component focus. But again, at a high level, Salesforce records in Apex are abstracted as S-object data types. You can retrieve records using SQL or the Salesforce object query language. You can iterate through your records that you've retrieved using SQL, and you can use for loops to do that and to run through them and add things, change things. And finally, once you're done working with your records in Apex, you need to commit them back to the database using the data manipulation language. And of course, always be on the lookout for code that it's not bulkified or is running DML and for loops. You'd maybe see that more than you'd like, but definitely something that I think you can recognize now if you read through your code. I think that's, yeah. So one last thing, as I X out of this, there's some great resources, the exam guide, the Trailhead Trail Mix that's provided by Salesforce. These are two of my favorite Dreamforce sessions. They're rather old, but they're really, really good. One for Apex Code for admins and one for Apex for developers. I would recommend both of them for everyone. They're really, really valuable. If you want to go even deeper, there's an advanced Apex programming book that's very popular by Dan Appelman. And then, of course, two great user groups to join on the Trailblazer community, Rad Women Code, which is that 10-week Learn to Code course that's community-led. And the Women Who Dev user group is also a great resource, and they run study sessions on Apex and all different types of programmatic tools. And finally, yes, so I used a lot of Kieran's Cooking with Code blog. That's also a great resource for folks getting started with Apex on the Salesforce platform. So with that, I will pass it back. Of course, Jessica, happy. I will pass it back to Gemma. Oh, question. So I saw a question from Tiffany. Maybe there are lots of questions. I just saw the last one pop up on a particular topic to learn first. I definitely think being familiar with when to use Apex and the functions of Apex, like we just covered, is a great place to start. And then if you're digging in deep, I think following the trail mix, they organize that in a really great way. Thanks, Melissa. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, some great feedback there. We've got a future CTA in our midst. Before you all run away, there's just one quick thing that I wanted to finish off with, and that is just that we have a competition that we're planning to run. And certainly, sorry, just we're seeing some more questions come in, so we'll get back to you with the answers to those questions after we've finished today. Before you go, I just wanted to make you aware we're running a competition in June, from the 1st to the 30th of June, and it's on the Top Trailblazers site. So those of you who aren't familiar with Top Trailblazers, there's a fantastic gentleman in Sweden and his friends who've put together a really great site that makes use of the Trailhead API. And what we're planning to do is in June, if you get the most Trailhead points in June, you could win. There are 3 prizes you can win. So if you come top, you'll get a lightweight hoodie. If you come second, you'll get a t-shirt. And if you come third, you'll get a mobile phone case. In order to enter the competition, all you have to do is click on the bit.ly link. So it's bit.ly/LBA Top Trailblazers, and that will invite you to pass on your Trailhead URL to us directly into our Slack channel. So if you want to join, if you come and opt in via the link, send us your Trailhead vanity URL. So if you have a vanity URL, that's great. If you don't, then all you need to do is go and get your user ID, which you can find on Trailhead really easily. And then I will add you to the Top Trailblazers group and to the event as well. We can't track your points unless you opt in and send us your Trailhead vanity URL. But if you get confused and can't find where to do that, then just send me a quick message on Twitter and I'll help you out. We will be tracking all the points that you earn between the 1st and 30th of June. And when we close the competition, we'll let you know if you're a winner, and we will shout out on the community group on Twitter and, off from the rooftops. So I wish you all very good luck. And I can't wait to see what badges you'll all get in June. Thank you very much for joining us today and for your attention. And thank you very much to Susannah for giving us so much time to take us through that really, really fantastic session on PD1. Good luck with all your exams. Please make sure if you do any certs in June, just make sure you tell us as well, so that we can celebrate you at the next study group, and we'll open up the vote for the next study group in the next few weeks. Thank you so much, guys. Take care. The slides and the recording will be available, yes.
Thank you.
Cool.
Bye.
Bye, Susannah. Thank you.
Bye, Susannah. Bye, everyone. Bethany, they'll be on our website, all the recordings for the study group.
And we'll post a link to them in the community group as well.
Aldo's asking, do we have a Slack channel?
We just set one up like 2 hours ago.
We'll share the Slack channel as soon as we've got everything set up. Gemma's been creating channels and links this whole morning, so as soon as we're ready, we'll share it with the group.
Yeah. Okay, Charlie, I'll FaceTime you. Speak to you later.
Good. Thanks. Yes, Aldo, I'll chat to you later. Thanks, everyone. Bye.